Wit, chapter 3, talks about culture. And so let's take a look at some of the absolute basics of culture. And when we talk about culture, what we're talking about is the way of life or the shared learned behavior of a group of people. So when we talk about the sum total of their skills, their beliefs, their knowledge, the products that they produce, all of that shared by a certain group of people and passed down to their kids. So that's what we really talk about as far as culture goes. And there's a variety of things that we'll look at in terms of culture. One of the things I want to distinguish is the difference between culture and society, because a lot of people confuse these terms. Society refers to the people who share a culture. Okay, so if we're talking about the people as such who share, generally speaking, they're in the same geographic area and they share a common culture, that's the society. But if we're talking about their way of life, their way of doing things, their beliefs, that's culture. Now, many years ago, back in the 1940s, George Murdoch actually researched hundreds, I believe it was close to 600 different cultures around the globe, and he actually composed a list of what he called 65 cultural universals. Now, a cultural universal is something that he found to be present in every single culture. Now, each culture may exhibit those things differently. For example, let me just give you some examples. Religion, dress, housing, music, cooking, language, family, family structure, funeral ceremonies, marital practices, even the concept of what's beautiful and what's not. Those are all cultural universals. But what he did find is that each culture exhibits those differently. We may have different dress styles, or we may have different religions between cultures, and maybe even within the same culture. Different generations do things differently. So, what is considered beautiful or something of that nature to, let's say, a young adult, by the time you get to old age, that may be totally different, okay, your concept of what that means. So, that's what we mean by a cultural universal, things that are present in every single culture. Now, cultural diffusion refers to cultures borrowing from one another. Diffusion basically refers to the process by which maybe a cultural item spreads from one group to another group or from one society to another society. For example, in the United States, we got our laws, our legal system, primarily from England. We have a variety of types of food that we have incorporated into our culture, but we borrowed these from others. Things like Chinese food, Italian food, pizza. Believe it or not, pizza was not prevalent in American society until after World War II. Men went over and fought in World War II, and they came back and they said, hey, guess what? We had something good when we were overseas, and now we have, I think it's a city requirement that there's 3 pizza places per block, within America. So we've kind of adapted to those things. American things like McDonald's and Starbucks have kind of gone around the globe. And that's what we kind of refer to as globalization. Globalization can be of a variety of things. It can be political, economic instances, things like that. But globalization is the idea of things spreading around the globe. And globalization has basically allowed cultural diffusion to take place a lot more quickly. Things like the internet and various sources of media, they've kind of shrunk the world and allowed it to the point where now, very quickly, if something is, popular or kind of a fad in Europe or someplace like that, we tend to see those things very quickly and they often spread. Okay, let's talk about culture and food. One of the things that you can, see in terms of differences between cultures is the way they eat, the types of food and things like that. Now, I'm going to, if you have a weak stomach, you might not want to look at some of this, but I'm going to go through this very quickly. But just as examples of different things that are popular around the globe. Now, in the United States, it's not throughout the entire U.S., but especially in the, South, fried frog legs. That's kind of a delicacy. That's something that people look forward to. And of course, we all know they taste just like chicken. Okay? But around the globe, there are other things that we may not particularly like or see as appealing. For example, bull testicles or mice wine. That is not something I would want to drink. Or, for example, in some Asian countries, dog is something that tends to be eaten a lot. Those are things that we don't tend to, particularly like in our culture. Now, let's talk about elements of culture. Different things that we notice about culture that help kind of identify different cultures. For one is symbols. There are various symbols that mean things in each culture. A symbol, of course, is just something that stands for or represents something else. So, a handshake or a road sign or like the golden arches. Little kids learn very quickly what the golden arches mean. It's a symbol, and they know what that means. The American flag is very symbolic within our country. Now, not all cultures, not all cultures really like to demonstrate or have their flag displayed near as often as we do. One of my foreign exchange students years ago from Germany, toward the end of her year in America, I was talking to her and I asked her one of the things, I said, what are some things that really surprised you? And one of the things she mentioned, I remember, was the fact that in America, she said, you see the flag constantly. Every school classroom, outside of buildings, you say the pledge, you sing the national anthem. She said in Germany, they don't do that. They don't emphasize nationalism to the extent that we do, because they've been burnt on that in the past. So, but symbols definitely help to identify different things within a culture. Language, probably the thing that separates cultures the most. This is the most obvious thing. And language can shape the way we look at the world, literally. When I was a kid, we used to refer to firemen and policemen. And that kind of gives an automatic indication that to be a fireman or policeman, you first have to be a man to hold those positions. Now, we have adapted over the years, and now we've kind of changed our language. So we don't refer to firemen now, we refer to firefighters or police officers. Those things have changed. Our concept of white and black have kind of identified us over the course of our history in America. For example, if you tell a little white lie, that's basically something that's acceptable. You're trying to, keep from hurting somebody's feelings or something like that. Basically, a white lie is kind of a good thing. All right, it's looked upon as okay. But if you are being prevented from joining a particular group, we say you have been blacklisted. Okay? Black is a negative connotation, whereas white was a good connotation. Those kinds of things. If somebody tells inappropriate humor, a joke that they really shouldn't say, we refer to it as black humor. Again, it's kind of a negative connotation. And if you look at the history of our country and how we have viewed black and white over the course of our existence, those things, it kind of gives you an indication of throughout our existence how we look at the terms white and black. Technology. Technology includes, all the tools, the skills, and rules for using technology, all of that. And generally speaking, the more technological the society, the more advanced we see the society. Now, we also form norms. Every culture has their own set of norms, and norms are basically just shared rules of conduct within the society. Now, we can talk about folkways and we can talk about mores. Folkway is a rule that's not of critical significance. Okay, if everybody violated the folkway, it wouldn't crash our society. Or our culture for that matter, such as eating with utensils. If everybody just decided that the next time you had spaghetti, you're just going to dig in with your hands and eat it with your hands, okay, you'd be going against a folkway. Okay, people would look at you strange, but it's not going to destroy our culture. A more, on the other hand, is a rule of vital importance to the existence of our culture. Things like don't kill, don't steal, you don't drink and drive. Those are higher level norms you'd almost think of. Those are things you definitely don't want to violate. Now, both folkways and mores can become laws in the form of things like parking tickets, speeding ticket. Those would be examples of folkways. Mores be things like murder or theft or arson. And then when we talk about norms, there's always exceptions for certain norms. For example, in war, I don't know if you'd want to say killing is rewarded, but it's definitely not considered a negative. So there are times or exceptions for various norms. Now, let's talk lastly about values. And when we talk about values, we're talking about the shared beliefs of what's good, bad, right and wrong, desirable, undesirable, all of that. And the values that a society holds helps to determine the character of the people within it. Now, years ago, there was a sociologist by the name of Robin Williams, not the comedian, okay, or the actor, not him, but Robin Williams actually outlined a set of about 15 values that he referred to as traditional American values, according to his research. Things like personal achievement, morality, humanitarianism, material comfort, nationalism, freedom. Those are some absolute basic values that essentially all Americans believe in. Okay? But what is interesting, even though we agree or we tend to agree on the values, values can occasionally cause conflict. We may agree on general values, however, various people don't uphold those values to the same degree. For example, the importance of material comfort versus child care differences. Should a parent stay home with a child, or should they go to a second job or have maybe a dual income family where they can actually bring more money in to be able to purchase more material goods? So that's one of those things that people sometimes differ in their opinion on. So values can unite us in the sense that we tend to believe in the same things, but they can also divide us in terms of the importance or the hierarchy that we place on certain values.